everyone. I'm Alessandra Harris, and today I have with me Dr. Ansel Augustine. We're going to be discussing his latest book, Praying with Our Feet, Encountering God in the Margins. So I'm going to read Dr. Ansel's bio because it's actually amazing the work that this man has been doing, and I'm so glad that he's back with us today. So, Dr. Ansel Augustine is an Emmy-nominated producer and an award-winning author. He is presently the Assistant Director of African American Affairs for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops and the former Director of the Office of Black Catholic Ministries for the Archdiocese of New Orleans. Dr. Augustine also serves on the Board of Trustees of St. Michael's College in Burlington, Vermont. He is also on the Board of Directors for the Congo Square Preservation Society and the National Black Catholic Congress. He is the former Executive Director of Cultural Diversity and Outreach for the Archdiocese of Washington. Previously, he served as the Associate Director slash Coordinator of Black Youth and Young Adult Ministry for the CYO Youth and Young Adult Ministry Office. He is also on the faculty of the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University of Louisiana Graduate Theological Foundation and Loyola University New Orleans and St. John's University in Queens, New York. Dr. Augustine has served on the board of directors for the National Catholic Young Adult Ministry Association and the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry. He began his career in ministry over 25 years ago when he became the youth minister at his home parish of St. Peter Claver in the Treme area of New Orleans, which he helped to rebuild following Hurricane Katrina. He has presented workshops and keynotes around the country and has written various pieces related to ministry, including the African American Catholic Youth Bible and the award-winning book Leveling the Praying Field: Can the Church We Love Love Us Back? He is also the author of Praying with Our Feet, Encountering God in the Margins with Loyola Press, which we're going to be discussing. Dr. Augustine is also an Emmy-nominated producer for the documentary Black Faith Matters. Ansel has worked in prison ministry for over 25 years in various capacities. He volunteers with the Mardi Gras Indian Council and at Backstreet Cultural Museum. He is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Inc., the Knights of Columbus, the Knights of Peter Claver, and has massed with the Wild, you're going to have to say
Yeah,
that.
Capitulus.
Okay. The Black Masking Mardi Gras Indians. He is also an associate member of the Sisters of the Holy Family in New Orleans, Louisiana, and the chaplain for the National Hip Hop Museum in Washington, D.C. That is an amazing biography, and I'm so glad that you're here with us today.
My sister, I'm glad to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Your latest book is called Praying with Our Feet, Encountering God in the Margins, like I said. You write that the phrase praying with our feet was coined by Rabbi Joshua Heschel, who participated in the Selma, Alabama civil rights movement. As Catholics, you say the notion of praying with our feet is captured in what is known as the 2 feet of love in action. Will you explain this concept and why you chose to title your book with this phrase?
Well, everything in the book is tied around Catholic social teaching with the Ignatian spirituality merged together. And for me, love is action, and faith calls us to be active people. Uh, I think many of us have gotten comfortable in church and comfortable in our going to Sunday obligation, and then we're done, or Saturday evening, whenever you go. But I think our faith calls us, and we read it throughout Scripture, calls us to be active in the world. We're still called to be countercultural, not of the world, but in the world. But in that counterculture, we are called to spread God's love by doing the things that we are called to do amongst those in the margins. And I share this throughout any testimony I have because I come from the margins. We are not bringing Christ to the margins. We are experiencing the Christ that's already there in the margins. And so praying with our feet calls us as church folk, especially in today's world, to be people of faith in the margins and in the world, and not to be unashamedly uh, faithful people that proclaim God's love for all.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, in your preface, you take us back to 2000 when you had recently earned an undergraduate degree from Loyola University, New Orleans. You were working toward a certificate in youth ministry from the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University of Louisiana, which is the only Black Catholic HBCU in the country. And you write that you were working at a radio station and record company with your heart set on a dream job of becoming a disc jockey. Now I'm fascinated by this and this Ansel 25 years ago. So tell me more about your life then and how you ended up working in ministry full time with this amazing biography that you have now.
Well, um, there's a lot that I wish I could do and bring back. If I had one wish, Alessandra, I would bring back pre-Katrina New Orleans. It was a very different place, different space. Community was different, vibe was different. This post-Katrina NOLA is something that, it is what it is, and I just tolerate. There's no place like home. And so 25 years ago, Ansel had hair, first of all. Katrina took my hair, but also was very, very involved and connected in the community in ways that is different now. I remember no matter where I went or even walking down the street, 20 or 30 car horns would pass by honk and be like, Ansel, what's happening? Blah, blah, blah. Just that sense of community. So even this was something always special to me, my home, my community. And so working in radio, that's what I started in when I started my undergraduate degree in communications. Working in, a record label, it's very popular coming out of New Orleans. I won't say names, but it was in the early years of its formation. And I thought that's what my calling was. But then one day, my father figure in my life was Father Michael Jacques, our pastor of 30 years in at St. Peter Claver, my home church. And my mother figure growing up was Sister Eva Regina Martin, who was Mother Superior of the Sister Holy Family, but also the executive director of the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at that time. And so because of them, that's why I was at the Institute. And they asked me to chaperone a lock-in at St. Peter Claver. They needed more male chaperones. And when I went, many of those young people were either relatives or knew of my friends that I had growing up who are no longer alive because of realities, of New Orleans in the 90s, murder capital of the world, or post-Katrina realities, just everything that was there. Anyway, when I chaperoned that lock-in, they knew of me, and I fell in love with these young people, right? So whenever I could, I would try to get a ride from uptown New Orleans at Loyola to downtown where our church was, just so I could be with them on Wednesday nights for youth group. And then Father Mike said, well, if you graduate, I'll give you a job. And I said, I can get paid for this? Now, he didn't tell me how much I wasn't going to get paid, this ministry for real, right? But despite all of the sacrifices, despite all of the financial hardships, it was just probably one of the most happiest times of my life. Like I said, that pre-Katrina youth ministry time at St. Peter Claver. I would, if I had one wish, I'd bring it back in a heartbeat. But that's what it was. It was just that transition of God speaking. And I wasn't really a you know, too wild a person. The nuns, the Sister Holy Family still joke about me getting put out of the high school dances with my friends because they run St. Mary's Academy, the all girls Black Catholic high school, and whenever there are dances, we would get put out. We were just whatever. Anyway, so they joke about me being in ministry now. God rest her soul, Sister Clara of Assisi, who used to be the president and principal of St. Mary's Academy. She jokes now. She used to joke about me coming into ministry, but in all of that, no matter where I was and no matter what, I always had a moral compass, compared to my other friends, because of the upbringing I had and the exposure I had to the faith. And so it just felt natural, this transition that, okay, now God is calling me to do this.
Mhm.
And even now, where I'm at now, God is calling me to do this for now until He calls me to do something else. So that's
Mhm.
the progression.
Okay, that's really interesting. So, when you say praying with our feet, You were really walking the walk when you were in dangerous situations. You describe a young man pointing a gun at you after you asked him and his friends not to disrespect three of your girl students you were supervising after a youth group event. And then after Hurricane Katrina, when you went back to New Orleans, you described how you were basically security for the church at night, literally sleeping there so no one would try and rob the place. And in another incident, you were almost carjacked by a young person who could have possibly been a former youth group student. So, talk to me about those times when I'm sure you felt your life could have ended. Did you feel God's protection?
Yeah, and it's funny you use that phrase, God's protection. That's what Ansel translates to in French,
Oh,
right? Yeah, that's what my first name means. But and I think in those spaces, when you're doing what God calls you to do, there's a sense of peace in the midst of those things. So yeah, when I had the gun in my face with the U group situation, yeah, I was scared, right? But I was like, I'm not, it's not, there was a back of my mind, it's not going to end here like this, although I might have got shot but I don't think that was where it was going to end. I might have dealt with the shooting or whatever. When we first came back to New Orleans, fast forward to the next scenario, when we first came back to New Orleans, Father Mike was chaplain of the NOPD. He passed in 2013, but at that time, we were able to get access into the city right after the water was drained to check on the church or whatever. And he asked me to stay. And I was like, I don't have a gun. I don't have anything. You want me to stay here? So at night, whenever I heard the doors rattle, I'd have to pretend like I was a dog and just bark from the top of the balcony of St. Peter Claver Church,
oh my God.
right? And during the day, I would gut out the pews and everything, to get ready and make way for the contractor that was coming in. The final scenario, it was challenging. That was the most recent one, and this was the night after I was at work at the Chancery at the Office of Black Catholics in New Orleans, and I was on my way to pick up a friend. And out of all of those scenarios, no matter what it was, the tragedies, the challenges, whatever it was, I was never one to just feel defeated. I grew up in, like I said, New Orleans, and we were taught to fight and do what we have to do if in any moments of trials. We might bend, but we don't break. We're resilient people. And resiliency is tiring too. But I think at the end of the day, out of all those scenarios, I was called to take action, whatever it may be. The first scenario with the U group, Katrina happened a couple of weeks later. The scenario with after Katrina, with living in the church, it was just me focusing on getting my community back. I wanted my home back, whatever it was, whatever home looked like. I wanted my people to have this sacred space that was home to me. The last scenario, I wanted my young people or that young man, whoever he may have been, to know that there was someone that cared and he didn't have to resort to that. And so, me helping other people prevent that life, I felt like I was helping that young man. So, it was always using my faith to say, God, let me use this hard situation to create something better.
Absolutely. So instead of locking your doors and closing yourself off from the world in fear after these experiences, you write about how you collaborated with a fellow Muslim imam and student minister, Willie Muhammad, to relaunch the Peacekeepers Initiative. So you didn't become tough on crime, you wanted to be a solution to end it. So can you tell me about that work?
Yeah. So Willie, brother Willie, who's a friend of mine, and we're always called to do certain prayer services or do certain things around the community whenever tragedy happens or celebrations are going on. So we've known each other for years. Um, after that situation happened where I was held at gunpoint or almost carjacked, he reached out to me, and we were just talking about what happened, and he wanted to relaunch this Peacekeepers initiative, which was um, anti-violence, conflict resolution type of opportunity and resource for the community. So we would go throughout the community. We would go to businesses and give out these cards that had the numbers for a conflict resolution hotline. We put billboards around the city, that had the Peacekeepers logo and the Archdiocese of New Orleans Office of Black Catholics logo, and on it was a casket that said "Stop the beef before the grief," right? And with the hotline on there. And of course, the people that were in a conflict wouldn't call, but their moms, their aunts, their grandmas, community members would call, and they would help us get these parties into the same area and have conflict resolution. to try to squash some of the beef. And did it work all the time? It was maybe a drop in the bucket of the violence that was going on, but it mattered to those people. And it gave something to do. Because, right now it's easy for us to throw up our hands and feel apathetic or overwhelmed or just not care. But that's not how God created us to be. Because if most of the people that we hold up in ideals and history books and just even role models in our community, if they felt the same way, nothing would get done. And so during this time period, what is God calling us to do? And that's my whole motivation of writing the book. And even just the ministry I have is just like, I'm not here to just hold a position or be silent. I'm here to make a difference. God put us here for that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And just wanted to say a side note that my grand dog is coming in and out of the back.
Yeah.
So in case you see that movie, and it's not the Holy Spirit, but hopefully the Holy Spirit will be with us today during our conversation. But just wanted to
Amen.
give viewers a note. Um, but I did want to just talk about that a little bit further because I have seen research that says when they've looked at violence in communities, oftentimes low-income communities with a lot of gang violence or just gun violence, it's a small circle of people who are doing the same violent acts, the same carjacking, the same robbing. Um, and that if you can disrupt that, oftentimes they're called violence interrupters because they're literally trying to stop those people who are committing the crime, that often that's more effective than just locking someone up and then they get out and then they don't have a job, but now they have a record, a criminal record. So it's harder to get back into employment, back into life. So would you say, like, I know you said it didn't work all the time, but would you say that model of trying to interrupt violence often works better than just locking people up?
Oh, definitely. And you're seeing, like you're talking about statistics all around the country, these communities where governors and mayors are investing into resources for the community rather than resources for uh, locking people up or judicial system or whatever. Because New Orleans is number one for mass incarceration in the world,
Mhm.
and that's not an accident,
Yeah.
but when you start investing into those spaces, you see crime reduced. You see these realities of young people and even communities seeing that they are treated with dignity and there is some self-worth going on. And they're like, okay, rather than me doing this wrong, I'm gonna do this. Because 9 times out of 10, Alessandra, we're stereotyped and we're called all kind of things because of we're doing certain things. But many of folks are trying to do these things to survive because they don't have the opportunities and resources other people have.
Absolutely.
Orleans Parish or Parish, as we say, county everywhere else, but in Louisiana we say parish. But Orleans Parish is so under-resourced, we don't have the same resources that our neighbors in Jefferson Parish or other places have, and it's a slap in the face, and so young people, families trying to survive, they're going to do what they have to do. Nobody wants to just lay down and die. So how are we creating opportunities and appropriate resources for people to survive and thrive?
Hmm. Absolutely. And with these questions, I'm not trying to portray New Orleans as a violent place by pointing your experiences out, but you do talk a lot about the injustice of poverty, that you have seen firsthand. And you have a quote from Pope Francis's Laudato Si that says, quote, "The loss of jobs also has a negative impact on the economy through the progressive erosion of social capital. The network of relationships of trust, dependability, and respect for rules, all of which are indispensable for any form of civil coexistence." End quote. You then write, "The current advocacy position of the USCCB tells us, quote, the most effective way to build a just economy is to make decent work at decent wages available for all those capable of working," end quote. So, like we talked about, in many low income neighborhoods, and often with neighborhoods with a large concentration of Black Americans, there's an absence of decent wage paying jobs. There is high unemployment, especially youths are often not working. So, will you talk about this further within the context of your experience and what called you to write more about how we need to do more for these people who you could say are on the margins? I'm sorry, margins, and why you think it's an issue people of faith especially need to address?
Well, I think for all of us, um, we have to always look at creating the kingdom of heaven here on earth. That's our goal. And for that, everybody needs to have the sense of I have the ability to do what I need to do to just live freely. Right. And many of the folks, if you look at it's funny, poor people seem to work 10 times harder and spend a whole lot more money just to survive than anybody else. When you look at the realities of just anything, fines, surviving just to pay medical bills, doing whatever that needs to do that normally many of us take for granted because it's in our natural ways of jobs or other opportunities that we have that other people don't have. For example, I remember 2006, 2007 post Katrina how the cost of living in New Orleans tripled and quadrupled. The houses that were in my neighborhood, which were 75 to 95,000 before the storm, were now 300,000, 400,000, half a million, those same houses. But wages didn't increase for us, but it
Yeah.
was for other folks from the East Coast, West Coast that were used to paying that stuff that wanted to come to New Orleans, could work remotely, or just, all these other tech jobs and other things were popping up in the city. But yet our people, locals, weren't trained to have these jobs, so it wasn't for us. And so we were priced out of our own communities and neighborhoods. And so for me, the justice issue is this, I grew up around people that were struggling, people that were hustling, people trying to do whatever. But yet then I see, with my experiences of, being able to go to college, being able to even live other places and seeing how other people are able to excel and have other opportunities for their kids and their families. Why can't I have it too? Why can't my people have it too? And so that's been one of the justice issues that we were fighting for when I came and we were trying to get New Orleans back. Like I said, I was living in the church, trying to build stuff back. And when I started working for the Archdiocese, trying to help our other Black Catholic churches with their youth ministries rebuild and come back, it was these advocacy issues that, well, I have a better life in Texas. I'm gonna just stay here. I have a better life and opportunities in Atlanta. I'm just gonna stay here. DC, Maryland. I'm gonna stay here. And the school systems, unfortunately, are still struggling. The school to prison pipeline is real in New Orleans. And so just all these negative things that are happening. Why can't my people have a just life just like everybody else, a safe life just like everybody else? Nobody wants to live in violence. Nobody wants to live in poverty. Nobody wants to, do all these things that are there. So if we are truly made in the image and likeness of God, if we are truly brothers and sisters, and even the Kwanzaa principle, I believe is Ujima, talks about my brothers and sisters' problems are my problems. If we truly live this out and believe this as people of faith, then we should be helping one another achieve the same sense of, I guess, stability that we all have.
Yeah, absolutely. I know been a very similar situation where I live in Santa Clara County that's known as Silicon Valley now
Mhm.
because the tech companies have come in and displaced so many people who can't afford to live here anymore. And consistently, San Jose, California, is one of the most expensive housing markets, if not the most expensive housing market now in the country. And I recently read a statistic that said that average person making minimum wage has to work 2.5 jobs to be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment.
Mhm.
So many people are getting left behind. Unfortunately, a lot of the tech companies are also laying people off right now. But I guess my question to you is, why do you think that people who are not living in poverty or not on the margins, why should they try to help other people? Because they have their material needs met.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we have to understand it's not about me, it's about we. And especially if we're people of faith. That's what I'm focusing on. Is because I see a lot of our young people and young adults leaving the church or struggling with the church as an institution because we preach one thing, but we practice something else. And that's the whole thing. Capitalism, as Pope Francis used to challenge it on a regular, is one of the foundational evils of our society because it puts a price tag on your worth and my worth. If I can only do this, then I'm only worthy, not just because I'm created. So, where it's easy for us to stereotype the homeless man on the corner, because we're not in that suit. But it's easy because as long as I'm driving my car and I got my AC, oh, he or she must be lazy, drug addict, whatever. They must be this, they must be that. Rather than looking at them as a child of God and what are the institutional realities that have created this,
Yeah.
for to be their situation. You
Yeah.
know, just like that young man that helped me up. You know, I could have stereotyped him, you know, you thug, you this, you that, you know what I'm saying? Even though I was angry and I was upset, you know, but then I was like, why is this that reality? And what is God calling me to do? And that should be all of our reactions to the injustices in society, you know, because at the same time, what if that is Jesus? And it is.
Mhm.
It is, you know, and that's the problem is because when I get to the gates of heaven, you know, they go, what did you do for the least of my people? You know, and that's why prison ministry is so important to me. That's why all these things that I do is not because I'm trying to be some super holy person or see people look up to me or anything. I'm trying to just make God proud, you know, and do what He's asking me to do. And so when I see injustices, and I'm not perfect at it, you know, I'm just the one with the voice to share it and hopefully inspire other people to do what they need to do in their own areas. But that's what we're called to do. So, in all of these injustices that are occurring, we as people of faith are called to make a difference and address those as best as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're talking about the need for people to advocate for racial and social justice, um,
Hmm.
and for people to go to the margins and meet people like Jesus did, people who could be Jesus. Um, but a lot has changed since the election, and this current administration, Congress, and Senate have passed laws that will intentionally hurt the poor, especially Black and brown people who are lower income. You have them threat the big, beautiful bill threatening to take away insurance from people, to take away Medicare, to take away funding for schools, trying to dismantle the Department of Education. There's been hundreds of thousands of Black Americans who've lost their jobs just since he's taken office with the federal government layoffs. So, do you believe right now that Congress can be made in this type of environment, or do you feel like we're just gonna kind of have to get through this administration's timing?
I believe there's always hope. You know, and I look for me, you know, Alessandro, when I'm in my position at the USCCB or when I was at my position in the Archdiocese of New Orleans and I felt hopeless, I always imagined our ancestors in the civil rights struggle, you know, the dogs, the hoses, you know, but yet they kept going out there, not just for them, but for us that they didn't even know was going to be here, but knew we were coming. Right. And I think that's the same hope we need to have. I think for us, we've gotten, like I said, comfortable, you know, and that's why our faith calls us, we're called to put our faith into action. And that's why, you know, one of my first jobs, you know, out of college was community organizing. You know, I worked with all congregations together. I think it's part of the PICO network. And, you know, I was organizing young people in the community to put their faith, like I said, into action. They would have these things called actions where we'd have the police chief, different politicians, including the mayor at the time, and they would meet at one of the churches, and these young people would share their issues, and this is what we need, and blah, 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 blah. But that's the kind of stuff we need to have again because the community has lost the sense of being community. And it is in those divisions and separations that, you know, these evils can exist because we are not organized and we're not sharing, like, okay, as people of faith, I'm speaking of, this is what our values of a good society is supposed to be. And these are the values that we're supposed to have in society for one another. But like I said, capitalism says, well, I got mine, you know, I'm good, so I ain't worried about you. But they don't understand as time goes on, it will affect us. If one person is struggling, all of us are struggling. And if they're coming for one group of people, they're going to come for the other group of people, which will affect everybody in the end, anyways. We're more
Absolutely.
connected than we realize.
Oh, yeah, definitely more connected. But you're saying that we still need to have hope.
Oh, yes. At the end of the day, that's what Jesus calls us to have, even in the darkest times. So it's funny. I was just at a men's retreat and conference, and one of the things we talked about was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. You know, even in the midst of Nebuchadnezzar telling, bow down to my statue, bow down to me, they said, we know who our God is,
Mhm.
and we know what God has promised us, and we know what he's going to do, and we will call out to him, and he will show up. But even if he doesn't show up, we're still not bowing down to you because they knew who they were and whose they were. And that's the faith and type of conviction we need to stand on as we address these issues.
Amen. Absolutely. That story from the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
So I want to I want to, it's similar, but along the same lines, but wanted to change a little bit because I've had conversations with other Black Americans, some Black Catholics, and have seen online dialogue after Kamala Harris lost the election, where Black people and specifically Black women are on sabbatical. And
Mhm.
they don't want to protest. They don't want to fight back. They are tired of always being the backbone, so to speak, of society. But we're seeing efforts to erase Black American history. Like I said, hundreds of thousands of Black people and women in particular have lost their jobs.
Mhm.
Black youth unemployment has reached 21% this summer. And your book makes the point that all people, regardless of color, need to put their faith into action. So, and like you just said, with thinking about the civil rights movement and how people literally laid their lives down and their lives were taken because of their advocacy. So I will admit at first when it was like Black women were saying, well, we're the 92%. 92% of us voted for Kamala Harris. We did what we could to get her in office. Our efforts were fruitless, so we're just gonna chill. And I've kind of passed up some local protests because I'm like, yeah, that's not my fight. But I'm starting to rethink that.
Mhm.
And what do you think? Do you think Black Americans need to get back into the fight, so to speak, or do you think it's not our fight?
Well, I think everything is our fight because we're always the most vulnerable. Black unemployment is at the highest it's been since the pandemic. I think it's at 7.2%. So I mean, those realities are affecting us, but I think how we fight needs to change. It doesn't necessarily need to be, we need to be at a protest holding up a sign with everybody else. I think for us, we need to regroup and understand who we are as people in this country because we've lost that. Like I said, we've gotten comfortable, over these past generations. We've gotten comfortable. And when you hear the stories of, like I said, our civil rights brothers and sisters, there was a sense before, the civil rights bill was passed and integration was the norm, this sense of community that we had. Like if I saw you struggling, I had your back. There was a sense of community. But right now, I'm just worried about getting my mansion. I'm worried about getting into this neighborhood. I'm worried about my kids getting into this school. I'm worried about such and such as this degree, these titles behind my name. And we've lost the sense of community. And even some of the struggles I have back home is the fact of the matter of some of the people. And this is what my struggle with, like I said, pre-Katrina New Orleans is different than post-Katrina NOLA. I can't stand NOLA. But at the end of the day, some of the people I was fighting alongside, I ended up fighting against because they were just trying to get their share of the pie at this point, with all the Super Bowls, with all the Essence Fest, with all the, whatever's coming into town. Right now, I'm trying to see how they're going to commercialize the 20th anniversary of Katrina, and all these influencers coming into the city to, share this story and make it popular rather than us seeing that there are still people struggling and can't afford a decent living in the city. Infrastructure is bad. Politicians are doing what they're doing and playing with the money, but yet we're okay with that as long as we're having a good time, or as long as someone popular is being seen and we're getting likes on social media, all that craziness. So I think for us, we need to reevaluate what does it mean to be black in America? And this is a question I'm asking young adults around the country. What does it mean to be black and Catholic? And how are we looking at that to establish our foothold, not only in the church, but also in society, using the church values to make an impact on society? And I think that's where we've lost. And that's why we're tired, because we're fighting. I feel tired all the time because I feel like I'm fighting by myself. And sometimes I'm fighting the people I'm fighting for. You know how that goes. And so for us to regroup, reevaluate, and what does fighting look like for us now in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say, just kind of from my experience with the Black Catholic community, um, online or in person, a lot of Black Catholics have had Catholic education from cradle, not cradle, but fifth grade, I'm sorry, kindergarten,
Mhm.
all the way through high school,
Mhm.
if not college, if
Mhm.
not further. So a lot of us are educated in the Catholic school system, which is a really good system to be educated in.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, it opens doors for better jobs, better careers, better,
Mhm.
higher education, like I said. But at the same time, do you think that causes a disconnect from people who maybe went to the public school didn't have the money to go to a Catholic school, is not in a parish, with a nice church and, all the amenities that come with being in a Catholic parish. Unfortunately, there's less now,
Yeah.
after the sexual abuse crisis. But I just want to ask, do you think there's kind of a different onus on us Black Catholics because of the privilege that comes with having that Catholic education and everything?
Yeah, I think that depends on the community where the school is located. So, in New Orleans, we used to have plenty of Black Catholic schools, in the neighborhood. So we have the three Black Catholic high schools that still exist. We had, Black Catholic elementary schools in the parishes. So, I mean, I think it just depends on where.
Yeah.
But I have seen how sometimes, in some places and spaces, you see the elitism that sometimes comes with that Catholic education. And I think for us, especially depending on the religious order that ran the school, or if it was a diocesan school, whatever, because we had that quote unquote privilege of going to Catholic school. So it was me at Loyola, and Xavier, that I realized that as I get this education is supposed to help me make a greater impact for my community, not just to make money to put in my bank account. And trust me, working with the church, I ain't getting paid anything. And most of my money is going back to the people back home anyways, So, I'm not here to get rich. I'm trying to get to heaven. And I think that's what the Catholic education taught me. Even if I have a young people, so some of the young people I raised are now the pastor at my home church. He was one of my youth group kids. The business manager at my home church, he was one of my youth group kids. The youth minister at my home church, she was one of my youth group kids, but they were raised in a way that realized that their education called them to give back to the community, and it just happened to be that, father was sent back to his home parish, as his assignment. So he's at home. But I think there's a energy that comes with the education that comes from these Catholic spaces and places. But we as Catholic people have to remind ourselves, the end goal is heaven, not retirement, for lack of better words. Although that's not a bad thing, but
Yeah.
that shouldn't be the main thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And what is it, to each who is given much, much is
Is
owed? How do
expected.
you,
Yeah, much is expected. Right.
yeah, yeah. So definitely giving back. So you write about ministering mainly to Black and Hispanic Catholic youth in New Orleans. And I'm not sure if the demographic has shifted or not, but I'm interested to know your position on ICE's immigration
Mhm.
raids throughout the country. So for me, as someone who has written about racial profiling, racial discrimination, detention and incarceration of Black Americans in my latest book, In the Shadow of Freedom, it's hard for me not to see history repeating itself right now with ICE, but they're now targeting the Hispanic community,
Mhm.
the way police targeted the Black community during the war on drugs.
Mhm.
And like we're seeing, they're targeting both documented and undocumented Hispanic people, people who are US citizens or people who aren't. So they are not discriminating who they're targeting. So just wanted to know, what are your thoughts about the current situation?
Okay. First of all, before I go on that, you forgot to mention your award-winning book, sis. Congratulations on that. All right. I got to give you your props on that. I'm proud of you. Um, but I think for me, the phrase that comes to mind is no one is illegal on stolen land
Mm,
built with stolen hands.
mm,
And I think for us, we have to remember the history of this country and who are we to say who's welcome and who's not welcome. And I do agree that there are certain ways of legal paths of citizenship and anything like that. But I mean, like, this is all God's land, and so I struggle with it. And I'm not the best legalist, on all those things. So I'm not the best person to ask, but as a moral person,
yeah,
the way that this is being handled is just so inhumane, and I mean, if Jesus, I mean, Jesus could have been one of them, and like, even now that churches aren't safe sanctuaries anymore, all these eminent domain type things that they're going on, I think New Orleans was a sanctuary city, at one point, and so now they're challenging the mayors of these sanctuary cities and withholding funding and stuff like that. So it's just bullying and stuff like that. I'm like, we shouldn't be scared or fearful. Nobody should be scared or fearful. If this is supposed to be the richest and most wealthiest and most um just most wealthiest area in the world. People should feel safe and secure here, and we don't want this country to turn to a country where we become refugees. And I was labeled as a refugee in 2005, just fleeing my own city just for safety. You know what I'm saying? Because we were flooded. But it was inhumane. And I don't want anybody to ever go through that and witness what's happening here. Like I said, at the end of the day, I want to go to heaven. And so I want to be in right alignment with my faith. And what my faith tells me is this is unjust. This is injustice in front of us. And how are we addressing it and how are we going towards it? And for us, there were mass layoffs, at where I worked right when I started because of, these changes and withholding funding and stuff like that. So it affects people on various levels, and the services that are needed. And so my thing is we need to pray in the church, but also put our prayer into action by aligning with our brothers and sisters that are suffering and
Hmm.
advocating for them because they might not have the voice to be. And so I'm inspired by I think it was in California, and I don't want to say the diocese and get it wrong, but it was several of the dioceses where the bishops went to courts, and along with their priests to be moral witnesses for these folks that were being detained in the courts and everything like that, and that attend trials with them. So we need to be present, like I said, bold and present with the message of Jesus Christ and hope and liberation that He brings.
Yeah, I have been impressed with the stance that the Catholic Church has been taking. Um, like you said, like going to the hearings. I
Hmm.
also saw, I think it's the diocese in Los Angeles that's
Hmm.
setting up a fund or funds for people to be able to raising money for people who've been affected who cannot work anymore, or if like parents were deported and the children are still here, money for them and stuff like that, or
Yeah.
people who don't want to leave their house because they're scared they will be deported. So
Hmm.
I have been encouraged by what the church is doing. Um, but I wanted to turn now to back to your book, Praying with Our Feet. You've infused Ignatian spirituality throughout the book, and Loyola Press is a Jesuit publishing house. So, will you speak on your experience as a follower of St. Ignatius's teachings and specifically the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius?
Yes, focusing on Ignatian spirituality, I think though there are a couple of things that stand out to me as Magus, the greatest glory for the greater glory of God, is understanding that everything we do is not about us, but about what God does through us. So even when the question, and I guess maybe that's the answer I should have given in the question when you asked about being tired and not wanting to be in the fight anymore, it's ultimately the energy and the work is God's work, and we're just His instruments. So when you rely on that. And I think about the times when, Dr. King was fighting, and I'm sure he was tired sometimes. He didn't want to give the speech. He didn't want to get on the road, and obligations with family and friends, Malcolm X, even the six African Americans on the road to canonization, during their times, many of them were legally property,
Mhm.
seen less than human, but yet they still saw the value of God and their faith to make a difference in the world. And so looking at that, I think for us, that's Ignatian spirituality. And I think the one value that I see that ties into African and Black spirituality in general is seeing God in all things, right? And so that the disconnect between the earthly world and the spiritual world, there is none for us.
Mhm.
Because ideally, we still talk about Jesus being amongst us, the Holy Spirit being amongst us. That's Catholic stuff right there, right? Just like the curtain behind you being moved by the Holy Spirit. You know what I'm saying? It's all ties into our daily existence. And so for us, understanding that God is calling us to make a difference in the world, but it's His strength we're leaning on.
Mhm.
So even when we see these tragedies in the world going on that's been happening the past few months, the injustices that are going on, this is God speaking to us, but we have to be in tune with Him to know what is going on with even with the spiritual exercises, the different levels of discernment, the journey of crucifixion, the journey of resurrection, all those times and reflection that happened during the various weeks of the spiritual exercise and the journeys that are there. We're all part of that journey. We're part of being crucified, but we're also part of rising. But if we're not going through anything at the time, but we see our brother and sister experiencing something, we are called to put into motion, our faith into practice so that we can address those injustices that they're facing and let them know they're not alone. Sometimes we're called to be the presence of Christ in those spaces or also remind them the presence of Christ in the space that they're in.
Absolutely. It reminds me of when people say we might be the only Bible someone ever reads,
Amen.
only face of Jesus that someone will encounter that day. So
Amen.
it's really us being there, us letting um, God and the Holy Spirit work through us.
Amen.
Um, so toward the end of the book, you write about
Hmm.
ecological concerns, and how care for God's creation should be integral to our faith. Has your belief evolved on ecological concerns as you've aged and as global warming has become ever more present in our lives? Or have you always believed in the stewardship of land as God's handiwork?
Amen. Well, it's funny when you were talking about as I've aged, and I just looked at the my picture, my video, and I just saw where did all those gray hairs come from, right? But I mean that's reality, and I think for me, I always go back to how my life changed in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina, and now documentaries and all these things are happening. It's triggering a whole lot of memories and emotions and different things like that. And um, for me, I just realized how volatile Mother Nature can be and how we need to address it. And even a couple of years ago with Hurricane, I believe it was Ida, that hit New Orleans on the anniversary of Katrina, and me and Bishop Cherie, God rest his soul, evacuated to Montgomery. He wouldn't leave, so I didn't leave. I was going to go with my sister and them to Houston, but yeah, he wouldn't leave, and I didn't want to leave him there by himself because we didn't know how bad it was going to be. And power went out, and the next day it was hot. It was August 29th, New Orleans. The humidity, it was in the heat, it's the humidity. And he was like, maybe we need to leave. And I was like, yeah, I told you this yesterday, but okay. And so we ended up driving to Montgomery and ended up at Resurrection Catholic Church with Father Manuel and that community that took care of us as we would go back and forth from New Orleans to Montgomery to check on things. But I think for me, the awareness of the earth is our home, you know, and even the writings of Pope Francis and just even other documents that have come out before then, helping us remember that this is just a temporary space for us. And how are you taking care of this temporary space? With the as people of faith, being good stewards of what God has given us. It's almost like you know, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. God created this beautiful space for us, and we're called to take care of it. And I think the way we mismanage or the environmental things that were going on, even for the sake of capitalism, to try to create a product that people will buy, but the harm that it causes the environment is almost our new way of taking a bite out of the apple. So for me, yes, I'm conscious of it. Could I do better? Of course. But I'm up here in the East Coast and everything is recycled here and everything there's more of a conscious thing here than there was back home in New Orleans. But we as people are trying to survive. But the loss of the wetlands in Louisiana that surround Louisiana that used to be a buffer for hurricanes in the past are no longer there. So they come in on land stronger than they would have. And that's what happened with Katrina. That's why it was so strong when it made landfall because those wetlands that used to be a buffer and break up the winds and the rain were no longer there because of the oil industry so all these are ecological factors that are affecting other people around the world right now. And so even as the earth warms and we look at um, the Antarctica and the ice glaciers melting, that's causing the waters to rise. And my hometown is below sea level,
Uh-oh.
So if you look at a map of, they're saying in like 30 years, these cities will no longer be here. These are the coastal cities, in America. And so, I mean, just looking at us, we need to be aware of how these things affect people. And it's always the most vulnerable communities, the poorest communities that are affected by climate change the most. And we need to be aware of that.
Absolutely. And I didn't mean to say anything about as you age, but I just
All
know
right.
I
It's
know
all right.
for me, since I have now a 16, 18, almost 21, and 23-year-old, I'm thinking about what world or what planet is going to be left to them. And if they have kids, their kids. So I think as I'm aging, I'm just kind of taking it more seriously. And where we are in California, we have the really bad wildfires.
Right.
And people are literally fleeing. and literally being displaced. Homes are literally being leveled to the ground because of these fires. So for someone who's lived here all her life, there's no way I could say climate change isn't real or
Mm.
that it's not happening right now. So I think it is really important for people of faith to think that, because I understand that this is not our final home, but we still want to leave it inhabitable for the people after us.
Amen.
Definitely.
Amen.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to add anything about your book or any other party messages for our viewers. It's been such a pleasure getting to speak with you today. So, yeah, just wanted to ask if there's anything else you'd want to do or say at this time, other than me, of course, plugging your book and just saying you definitely have to pick this up.
Thank you, my sister. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of y'all that are watching and listening. Just a quick story, and and it's not in the book, but it's as a result of being in the margins with my favorite ministry is the prison ministry back home. And one of the things that I like to do that I did back home, but they still fly me home sometimes to do is to give college tours of Black New Orleans. And so this was, I think, UC Santa Barbara came down, and the professor that does it, I went to college with her at Loyola. And so she asked me to give them the tour. And this was like a beautiful day in New Orleans. And I think it was springtime, so it wasn't as hot. So I walked from the hotel to through the French Quarter to I was walking towards Peter Claver. But as I was walking past Congo Square and Louis Armstrong Park, a gentleman on a bike pulled up. Is that Doctor? And like, is that Dr. Augustine? And I'm like, who is this? And I looked at him. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him at all. And so we were just talking, and I was like, yeah, I'm about to stop at the Treme coffee shop because, I'm a little early. You want to join me? So we sat down, we're talking, and, we ordered our coffees and teas or whatever, and we're just sitting there, catching up with one another. And all of a sudden, he was talking, and then that's when he let me know he just got released from prison. And he was one of the prisoners I ministered with at Rayburn Correctional Facilities that I dedicate the book to.
Oh.
And so his name is Norman.
Mhm.
And Norman and I, we were just talking and just he was telling me about how he's just getting readjusted life, how grateful he is to be out and all these things. But I just thought if I had left 5 minutes later, or if I had decided not to walk and ride the bus with the students from the hotel, to the church and all this stuff, I wouldn't have had this encounter. And now every day, every morning, Norman, like clockwork, texts me, "Hey Doc, how you doing? Good morning," and sends me some scriptural message, right? My own family doesn't do that, right? The church people I did the most for, kids and their families don't do that. They don't check on me, but Norman does. So I think for me, that's God's way of reminding me how powerful His presence is in the margins. So
Mhm.
when we go, and I encourage everybody to look at what are those marginalized communities in your network, in your neighborhood, in your ministry space, place, work, wherever it is, and see how you can connect with them. Like I said, we're not coming in as saviors. We're not bringing Jesus to anybody. Jesus is already there. We're encountering the Christ that's already there with the folks that are there. And so for me, with this man Norman, the work I did at Rayburn, all of a sudden is being given back to me in various ways. So I'm grateful, and I thank you for this time, and I pray for everybody as we encourage one another to use our gifts and our talents to pray with our feet and make a difference in the world.
I love that story so much. And thanks again for spending this time with me.
Thank you, my sister. I appreciate you.